Welcome, everybody, or welcome to the people that are in the process of joining from the waiting room. And we're going to give a minute or so for everybody to get joined. We have a lot of people that registered for this. It would seem that we struck a nerve with
Good.
this topic. Yes, so hello, everyone. I'm Mark Morrell, president of Carrier's Edge. And today we have Jane Jazrawi, CEO of Carrier's Edge, who has been diving deeply into this subject, I think, as a bit of a passion project because uh, I can see that you're very intrigued by it and you're very energized digging into it.
Well, I'm energized digging into anything. And
Mhm.
because I do more management now, I don't get to
Mhm.
dig into things. And it's not really a passion project, but it's
Yeah,
interesting. It's
it is
interesting.
interesting. And
Yeah.
also with
And
us today is Michael Miller, our director of marketing, who is going to do his best to get a word in edgewise between the two of us, yammering back and forth. So
Not,
you did
not
well
even
last
a
month,
thing.
Michael. Uh, okay, so I think,
so before we start, Mark, do you want me to like stop sharing at
yeah,
any
you
time?
can stop sharing for a minute. Jane actually put slides together on this. Not too
Really?
many, a few. But yes, you can
If I
stop
pause it,
sharing.
is that
You
enough?
can just
Okay.
kill it. You can just kill the share for now.
All right.
All right, because I have to start, as most of you can probably imagine, I have to start with some disclaimers. Big surprise. So we're going to be talking about the English language proficiency issue that has come up, has become kind of a hot issue over the past few months in the industry. But we are not CVSA or FMCSA, and we can't speak for them or enforcement. We also can't say what might or might not happen in the future. And it's important to note that we don't have any magic insight that no one else is able to get. Uh, Everything that we're going to talk about today is publicly available in terms of the regulation or the requirement and what's being done in that area. Everything that we're going to talk about is publicly available. So what we can do is break down that information that is publicly available, what we know about it, share what other people are doing, what we have learned about what people are doing, and what we're going to be doing within the Carrier's Edge training system. And I think more importantly, through all of that, share a process that all of you can use for addressing issues like this in the future, for figuring out things like this. Help you plan for regulatory chaos and upheaval in the future because this is not the first time that this sort of thing has come up. It absolutely will not be the last. It is English language now. Next quarter, it may be something else. A year from now, it'll be something completely different. So what we want to do is share a process that you can use to kind of figure this stuff out on your own, that old teach you how to fish approach. So anytime something like this happens, there's really three main things that people need to be thinking about, or three main questions that everybody goes through in one form or another. First off, what's changing? What is actually changing? And it's important to get clear and complete information on what is actually happening. Second thing, how does it affect me? What does this mean to me? What is this going to do for my day? And that's another place where we need to have a complete understanding of kind of all elements of it and think about the effect in different areas. And then the third part of that is now that I know what's changing and how it affects me, what do I do about it? And what's my plan? And along with that, what's my timeline? How urgently do I need to address this and what is the priority? So those are the things that we're going to talk about today. And
And
we are going to start with what's
yeah.
actually happening in the rule.
Yes, but let's just quickly, I know there's tons of questions. We have tons and tons of questions. And I think that we will be answering a lot of those questions as we go. But if you do have questions as we are going through, you can put them in the question and answer thing, right? Or is it?
They can use the Q&A, absolutely.
Okay. So Mike, that's Michael's job. I would like it I want to start with don't panic because what we're going to do is try to be as clear as possible about what this is. There's not much to this rule, but what happens is it seems when you break it down, it seems simple, but the implications are very complicated and chaotic. So I'm going to start with what the rule, two things, what the rule says and what the history of this rule is, or what, not what the rule says, but what the general idea of the rule is. So I'm just going
Mhm.
to do sorry about that.
Yeah.
Um, so here's the purpose of the English language proficiency rule is that drivers know English well enough to converse, understand signs, respond to official inquiries, and make entries on reports and records. So basically what it is that you have to be able to function as a driver in English. That's what that rule is, or that's what it's meant to be. That's the purpose. This rule actually has a big long history. This rule has been in place since I don't know when, but it has been in place since 2005. So what happens with rules, with regulations, and we learned this way back when the regulations for hours of service changed, and what happened was they stopped enforcing a particular part of the regulation. There was a part of the regulation that said, oh, you have to be out for 2 nights, overnight, 2 nights to satisfy your hours of service, and everybody kind of freaked out about that because it wasn't very useful. And then they just stopped enforcing it. I don't know if they repealed it, but they stopped enforcing it. And that's what they did with this. English language proficiency has always been the rule, but CVSA has decided whether or not to enforce it or not, which is what I want to.
Can we just talk about this just quickly here? So going back to, what the rule is, what it says, and think about why. I think it's always important here to step back and kind of look at it a little bit holistically. Like, why is this coming up? And as we've
My
kind of
history.
joked, yeah, we've always joked about on our podcast that every rule is a result of somebody rolling their eyes and saying, "I'm done with this. I'm fed up with this." So, put yourself in the shoes of a roadside enforcement person, and at a certain point, roadside enforcement people got fed up with struggling to try and have a conversation with the driver who didn't have strong English, and they couldn't get the information that they needed for the roadside inspection, or maybe it was post-incident. Maybe there's a crash and they can't converse with people about what actually happened to get the information they need to deal with the scene. So this kind of thing kind of makes sense. And it's in that context that the rule comes up. This is not going to be a requirement that you can write an English essay or a requirement that you can talk about things that have nothing to do with transportation. It's going to be about the load. It's going to be about the vehicle. It's going to be about road safety, highway signs. That's where the focus area is. So it's important to kind of think about it holistically and think about the scope within that context. So,
Yeah, on what Mark is saying, can a CVSA inspector have a conversation with the driver and get them to do what they want?
mhm,
That's that's what the goal of this entire thing is. Can they do this? Can they converse?
mhm.
And can they do it in English without any help? So this is where it started.
Yeah.
So this is a, so I'm going to go all the way back to 2005 because CVSA decided to make this an out of service issue. That if drivers weren't meeting the English language proficiency requirement, they were going to be placed out of service. I don't know if they did this beforehand, but 2005 is what I can see is when it started. And this was in the Bush administration. And what happens is when CVSA decides to do something, then they work with FMCSA, and then FMCSA says, okay, here's the guidance on how to do it. So in 2007, FMCSA issued guidance, much like the guidance that we're going to show you today,
Mhm,
the guidance document. Then in April 1st, 2015, this is this Obama era regulation.
mhm.
Basically, it happened during Obama's presidency. So the first one happened in Bush's, next one happened in Obama's. It's just CVSA is doing its thing, and they decided to remove the out of service um, the out of service criteria. So it wasn't out of service, but you could still be cited for it. You'd
Mhm.
still be fined for it if you couldn't speak English. So
And
then what,
actually, just on that, Maggie's question, it has been enforceable, but at the discretion, yes. There's
yes.
always the option. The enforcement officers definitely have those options to do that. But this is sort of
And
broadly speaking.
there's a FreightWaves article. We're going to give you some links later on to look at some applicable documentation around this. And there's a FreightWaves article that kind of goes through this, that in 2015 and 2016, they decided that it really wasn't that much of a safety issue. So they decided to
Yeah,
not
not making
enforce
it
it.
out of service
Wasn't
issue.
making wasn't making any safety difference. So what happened after that is when it gets complicated, because I know Maggie remembers, but
Mhm.
in Arkansas on February 24th, they introduced a bill, 1569, to ban foreign CDLs, which freaked out a lot of Canadians, and require English language proficiency. But what was at the time, everybody stopped at what? Foreign CDLs? Because that means Canada and Mexico. That includes Canada. So all the Canadians were thinking, oh my God, we can't go to Arkansas now. They weren't even considering English language.
Mhm.
And then what happened is a bunch of stuff that kind of has nothing to do with this rule, but there was an executive order on March 1st to designate English as the official language. Then the Arkansas bill, kind of the first one went away, and now they have a new one and they're replacing it because now it's just focusing on English language proficiency and bad CDLs, not necessarily foreign CDLs. And then on April 28th, there was another executive order requiring English language proficiency for drivers specifically. So what happens is when all of this, I think what happened here is, oh, there was one thing that happened that I don't have here, is that ATA got involved. The American Trucking Associations was involved. And they didn't want the states to kind of do a whack-a-mole thing because there already was this English language proficiency rule. It just wasn't being enforced. So both ATA and one of the House members of Congress asked the FMCSA to reinstate the rule that like that I've already talked about. It just wasn't being enforced. So can we reinstate it instead of having 50 different rules? Because you can imagine how chaotic that would be for everybody if there's 50 different rules. And it would be like weights and dimensions. You have to figure it out, which is not, it's not fun. So what happened after that, once that executive order came out saying we need English language proficiency, then the CVSA, the members voted to basically change their out of service criteria and add English language proficiency back into it. And then FMCSA did what it does, and it issued a new memo. And this memo is basically what I'm going to talk about after that. But now, June 25th, the new rules are going to be going into place. And we're going to talk about what that looks like. But what I want everybody in Canada, if any, we have Canadians here, is that when you send drivers to the US, you are sending them to another country. And I know that you all know that. But our rules, like how we deal with our own rules, our own laws and things like that, now it's like hours of service. You switch to the American hours of service when you cross the border. What we do in Canada, so there have been questions about human rights and things like that. It's what you do in Canada does not matter. It is all about what you're doing across the border. Everything's stop like when you cross that border, the rules change. So that's what we're going to talk about today in terms of what's going to happen. But when you are faced with new rules that are coming, there is lots and lots of information, and especially with enforcement, CVSA is not automatically going to enforce something the day after someone says that we should enforce it. They go through a whole system of how are we going to enforce it? How are we going to keep it the same over all the jurisdictions? How is this going to happen? So there's a lot of time. You have time. We have until June 25th. I know it's not that much time now, but there is time between when things start and when things happen. So it's
I just want to
never,
just point out on something on that because you make a really good point there, Jane. And this comes up a fair bit, and we see it in the reporting sometimes where people are writing stories about this stuff, and some of the unintended consequences of some of these stories suggest that it's this imminent thing that will immediately affect every single driver on the road the minute it goes into force. And that's not the case. I mean, there is a story, Transport Topics this week has a story about what's happening with this. And they say CVSA to begin roadside enforcement June 25th, or English language proficiency enforcement June 25th, or doing roadside English tests June 25th. It makes it sound like every single driver is going to be subject to a test immediately. That is not going to happen. So it's important to recognize that they're going to start doing this, they're getting their plans together, but it doesn't mean that the roadside inspection process is going to change, or every driver is going to be pulled off the road to do one of these tests. That's not the case.
no, it absolutely is not the case. And what I want to do, Michael, do you have the link to that FMCSA?
Oh, can you put it back in there?
Guidance document. Yeah, I do. I'll post
Yeah.
that right now into the chat. That should be there now for everybody to grab the link and see.
So this is a PDF of the actual, of
Yeah,
what
the actual rule.
actual rule, the regulation is. And it's a lot of,
Oh,
it
my bad.
begins,
Sorry, Jane, I'm going to interrupt you. I think I just posted that to um, us and the panelists. I think I forgot to put it to
okay,
everybody. So
give it to everybody. But this,
now everybody's got it. Sorry about
and I was going to actually send this as an, yeah, I'm having some issues with Word. But this document goes through the history of the rule. And so this whole thing that I've told you about what happened in 2016 and 2014, all of that's in there, but it also talks about what the CVSA inspectors are actually going to do and what the goal is for this and what it's not going to do. And I'll talk to you about that in just a second. Do you want me to keep going with the,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So this is from this document, so you don't have to try and read it really quickly. And are there questions, Michael,
Yeah.
that I should answer?
So we do have one question or a comment from Mandeep. Looks like they've started enforcing this. Two of my drivers were refused entry in US at border only in May. So that's a different thing. Uh, yeah, that's border entry, and that has never changed. It has always been the issue. So if you haven't had it before, you may have been lucky. What we're talking about here is inside the continental US, what's happening at roadside there. So roadside inspections and anything that's happening there. And
Border
Maggie is,
enforcement, border enforcement and roadside enforcement are different.
yeah,
So
totally different.
border enforcement may not let your drivers in if they don't think that they can speak English. That's a different rule.
Yeah.
Or for other reasons, because who knows what border enforcement does.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got a report that the page is not working, which is weird. So we can we're going to include it in the handout. We've got a bunch of links that we're going to be sending you about this, so we'll include that in there. It's on the FMCSA website, in CVSA website as well. They're not secret documents by any means. It's right up front there. So. Maggie's got a point on some overzealous DOT officers in Arkansas flexing their muscles, clients reporting they're being asked to transcribe a paragraph in their own words to prove they know what it means. Yeah, well, that is interesting. This is why we said that we can't always see what's going to happen in the future. Everything that we're talking about is broad strokes planning, broad strokes approach. There is always going to be some enforcement person who does something different, somebody who's not as strict, somebody who's way more strict. So this is the direction But again, as Jane was just pointing out, this is not a new rule. This has always been the rule. So anytime there is a rule that somebody chooses temporarily to not enforce, you have to assume that it's going to change back. Like the rule doesn't go away just because somebody isn't enforcing it. They might enforce it tomorrow. You kind of have to assume that that is still the rule and you still have to follow it and certainly be aware of it. So,
And when things start and they're unclear, people take advantage. So they're going to do stuff like this.
yeah,
CFSA inspectors should all be doing the same thing. If they're not, that's a different issue. And you can talk to CVSA about
yeah.
that. CVSA is concerned about having everybody do it the same way. And they spend a lot of time and a lot of energy
Mhm.
trying to make sure that everybody is doing everything the same way. And I'm not
Uh,
surprised that Arkansas might be flexing their muscles
yeah.
because it was their bill that they started.
Yeah, that totally makes sense that they would be doing that. So, Stephen, I see your question in there. We're going to come back to that because that is what we're going to be talking about in sort of the next section. Jane, do you have anything else on sort of the rule and what's changing and what it means, or do you want to move on to what we're doing or what carriers are doing to prep?
Now, let me go through what this rule is actually going to be.
Okay, yeah, go
Okay,
for it.
so for the guidance from FMCSA, this is from that document. Everything has,
Do you want to share that document?
did I not? Oh, do I want to do a share of the document? Not really, because it's not very understandable.
Yeah, it's written like a lot of these things are. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, so go
so
ahead.
hang on, let me just. Um, all roadside inspections have to be conducted in English. So what happens is that before, I think if people spoke Spanish or could converse in another language, the CVSA inspectors they were trying to get through it. But now it's English. And there might be a little bit of explanation about you're going to have to do a test that might be done in another language, but there is only English. You are not allowed to use smartphones or any kind of cue cards. You are not allowed to do that when it
No
in.
helper, nobody with you who can translate for you. No, you got to do it yourself.
So what happens is, as the driver comes into the weigh station or stops and talks to the inspector basically, if they can't understand the driver, they're going to do this. They're going to do an assessment and then they're going to start the process. So there are exceptions that I think is really important that haven't really been covered. That one is if your driver is hearing impaired and they have the exemption under the different part of the regulations, they are exempt from having to communicate orally. So if they can't communicate orally and they already have the exemption, then the exemption applies now. And the other exemption is that in the border commercial zones around the Mexican border, there are some places where the inspectors will give them a citation, but they won't put them out of service. So that's two of the things that are good to know there. So the hearing impaired thing, that's a carryover from the old rule. So they're keeping that.
But also, you have to already have the exemption. You can't just
Right.
claim, roadside, oh yeah, I'm hearing impaired and try and use that as an excuse. Doesn't work.
So there's two parts to the assessment. One, can you respond sufficiently to inquiries and directions? So if the inspector thinks that the driver can't understand English, they're not responding appropriately, or or they look like they don't understand, or they're saying I don't understand with, no speak English, or they're using gestures and things like that, then they kind of start an official driver interview. And there's no additional tools allowed. And at that point, when they do the interview, and we don't know what the interview is, I don't know because that has been redacted from the FMCSA guidance that CVSA only knows. But they do this interview, and if it appears that the driver really doesn't understand what the directions are or understand kind of question and answer, that kind of thing, then they're placed out of service. If the inspector thinks that this is a problem now, they're going to get placed out of service. So they do that kind of interview, which if you understand English is probably not a very difficult interview. For step two, that you don't do unless they think that you're kind of okay to converse. Then the second part is, do you understand road signs? So they give you a second test. Do you understand these road signs? And basically that's going to be, here's a picture of a road sign. What does it mean? And if you can't understand
And
the
it's not
road
going to
sign,
be a stop sign.
no,
It's going to be
it's not.
probably one of those road signs that has a bunch of English text on it.
That's a paragraph of
Yeah.
English text, and they exist. And then if they don't understand the highway signs, then so you can be placed out of service either at the end of step one or the end of step two. And if you're placed out of service, or if the driver is placed out of service, then there's no recourse. You're gonna have to send somebody in and get that driver home.
Mhm.
There's no
Yeah,
consideration
it's like a
for foreign CDLs. There's no consideration for Canadian. There's nothing. It
and it's an
is,
out of service, and it's not an out of service that you can fix by changing a headlight or sending a mechanic out to replace the tires on the truck. Until
there's
that
no,
driver can pass an English test, they really are out of service.
yes. And there's nothing that you can do. Like there's no, oh, but we'll put them in English training, or here's a certificate for English training. And, I certify that I've passed this. Nothing. Can you can you actually speak and understand the enforcement official when they speak to you? Do you know what these highway signs are? And that is it. There's nothing else you can do. The driver has to pass when they're there.
Mhm.
And if you are going to dispute it, you're probably going to have to dispute it the way that you dispute anything else. You can't, like, if that driver's out of service, someone's going to have to go get them, or they're going to have to go rent a car, or someone's going to go have to get the truck. They there's really nothing else in the regulation that as it is right now. Oh, and I've
Yeah,
got someone has raised a hand.
yeah. So Henry, if you can just put your question into the Q&A section there, then we can address that. Um, yeah, so these are the questions that are coming up. Really, are the issues to be considering. What are the implications for a driver that's been placed out of service? How can they cross the border again in the future once their language is improved? Well, if their language is improved and they can pass a test, then they're okay. What if they're placed sort of with whoever comes to get the driver that was placed out of service? Will they do an English test automatically with whomever to, yeah, are they going to test anybody who comes to get them? Yeah. There's nothing in the guidance
That's
saying one
something
way or
that
another.
there's nothing. I
Yeah,
would say probably, because if you are going to go pick
maybe.
up your truck, if a driver is going to come and pick up the truck,
Hmm.
the enforcement official is going to have a conversation with them. Like they're not just going to go and pick up their truck. At some point, they have to talk to them.
Hmm.
And if they see that this person can't understand, they're not going to let someone else get into a vehicle if they don't meet the English language proficiency. Like
Yeah.
they're not going to.
Well, and again, going back to my disclaimers, they might, who knows, but why would you chance it? Maybe they're overworked and it's their end of their shift and they don't care, so sure, they let you go. But don't send somebody out who is likely to fail the test, for sure. Um, Other question about does the truck get towed if the driver's placed out of service? There's no guidance about that. There's no specific guidance about what happens in the out of service. It's just placed out of service. So
So it'll
from
be
that,
however
it's
you
going to be
get
treated
placed.
like any other out of service.
Yeah.
There's no guidance one way or another. I think these things will probably start to shape up once it hits the field and they see what happens. I fully expect that we will see CVSA having updated guidance a month, 2 months, 3 months after this goes into effect. That's what happens with everything. You get it out into the field, they see what the reality is, and then they're going to have updated guidance or some interpretation or some clarification or something. But for now, this is kind of what we know of the regulation and what's being done there.
The other thing to do that's really important is go to the CVSA website. If you're a member, then you can get their newsletter. Get their newsletter because they'll tell you.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a terribly dry newsletter. Like I mean, it's not the most fun to read, but you'll know. And
Mhm.
also following the news because Truck News for sure will
Mhm.
update people. I'm pretty sure that everybody else,
Fleet
all
owners
the
got it. Transport Topics has got it. Everybody is going to be following this.
everybody's following this.
Yep.
So you just have to follow the news for whenever this gets updated.
So let's move on to what carriers are doing because we're burning through our time and we want to make sure that we cover things. So what carriers are doing and how to have a plan, how to figure out what the scope of the issue is. So Jane, you've done a little bit of conversation with some carriers to see how they're assessing it, and my takeaway from that is that what you're finding is really the biggest thing right now is understanding the scope of the issue to figure out where are the problems, like kind of testing that sort of competency, and that's what most the initial focus is for most people, right?
Yes, I would, before, if you haven't already done this and if you don't know the scope of the problem, this is the first thing to do is how many of my drivers don't speak English well enough to do this. And the one of the things that we're doing to assist with that is providing a test. It's not, I mean, it doesn't match the English proficiency. I don't know what the English proficiency test is. Like I don't know what it actually, what the questions are, but hold on. The what we're doing is we're creating a test that has it's all audio. Everything is audio. So you have to be able to understand spoken English in order to answer the questions. So the question is in audio, the answers are in audio. So we also have some questions regarding signs, and this will allow you to definitely figure out how proficient your drivers are in English because it's a pretty easy test to it's a pretty easy test to pass if you understand English. If you don't understand English, it will become very, very clear, very, very fast.
Hmm.
So this is one of the things that I'm working on with the KTG group to do. And it also goes through, let me see different documentation. So we have a question that is basically show me your CDL, what documents would you show someone, and then there's pictures of the documents, that kind of thing, which will give you an indication of how well someone is doing. This is not necessarily, it's not training, but what it
No.
is it's an assessment to see where you stand and
Yeah.
what KTG or what Kriska wants to do with it is use it for pre-screening. So if you're going to be traveling into the United States, you need to be able to be functional in English. This test will give you an idea of whether you meet those requirements for the job.
And that goes back to my second question that I said at the beginning. How does it affect me, right? You have to have a good understanding of what the actual problem is or the effect of the problem in order to figure out what to do next. So step number one is figuring out the scope. Who knows it? Who's perfectly fine? Who is absolutely a problem? Who is kind of on the border? Once you do that kind of assessment among your drivers, then you can start figuring out what you need to do as an appropriate intervention. I would also, I'm going to point out that FreightWaves, I think you mentioned this earlier, Jane, that FreightWaves had a good article about sharing the breakdown of what they've sort of found in research. This came from FTR, who does this kind of research all the time about where the violations typically are, what sort of plated vehicles were getting the violations over the past few years, what states are writing more tickets. So that is going to be something that we include in the wrap up, just sort of a link to that. But it's really helpful if you happen to be running those states, pay more attention to it. If you're running some other states where it hasn't traditionally been an issue, maybe it's not going to be as critical for you. But it is definitely something that you want to start thinking about. What is the issue and how do we, how do we assess this among our drivers? So we've got a test that's coming. It'll be, I think it's going to be in another week or two, and we'll be updating our mobile app as well to include that, so you'll be able to issue that test to people. The road signs that you were using there are great examples, and I thought it was worth noting that part of your process of putting this together, you're talking to other fleets, you're looking at kind of the sense of what they're likely going to be after and the kind of guidance that we have from CVSA. But then you went to Wikipedia, and the Wikipedia page on US highway signs actually has a lot of great examples of things, that it isn't just basic, shapes and things like that, but all of those signs that have got a lot of English text on them, where to find those and do people really understand them? Yeah, so the
Um,
links are in the chat there. So great.
I'm just gonna show you the, give me a second. I'm going to show you this
Okay.
road sign. So you really get a good sense, because we were thinking, well, what road signs are difficult to so stop, yeah, stop, yield, those are pretty easy. But then
Mhm.
you start,
Yeah,
uh,
you start getting into a lot of text.
there's a lot of text. And so left turn, left lane for left turn only. This one is lane for you and left turns only. That one's a more difficult one because it's two things in
Mhm.
one. So the more things that are in a sign, the more difficult they are to understand. Um, it
Yeah,
just,
any of these are going to be
any
tricky.
of
These are good examples.
So these are, so what I would do to prepare is also do some one-on-ones with your drivers and like see how they converse. One of the things that I was suggesting when we were talking about this webinar is online training is not, I don't think it's the answer. I really,
Well, yeah, just to clarify on that, because that was a question from earlier. Yes, if somebody does not have a good comprehension of the English language, it's really hard to find an online training solution to that problem. Yes, there's Duolingo, there's Babbel, there's these tools that help you learn English, and they're fantastic. But there's no course where you can sit down and spend an hour in front of a computer and learn English sufficiently. A lot of those
learn enough English to pass this requirement.
Yeah, because a lot of those are more generalized language skills courses. They're not going to ask questions about traffic signs. They're not going to have any sort of content that really helps you at a roadside inspection. So that is very specialized. And what to do about it, there is a lot of different solutions to that that will depend on the scope of your issue. And so, Jane, you had some ideas on what people could do to solve the problem on a larger scale.
Well, the first thing is figure out the levels of English that your driver pool has, because there's a difference between a heavy accent and someone who can speak a little bit or someone who can only read. Like there's different, like, when you
Mhm.
learn another language, you have varying levels of proficiency in that
But
language.
that's actually, sorry, just to pause for a second. That is also something to be thinking about as you're assessing the skills of your drivers. Think about that in terms of comprehension, spoken stuff, like all of the things that Jane just said about the different categories of competency in the language. Start to sort of group them that way, and then you can move in.
I'm really good with written French and Spanish. Not speaking it, but I'm good with it being written because I generally wrote the English and I'm looking at the translation. So I'm much better with written, but don't get me to say anything uh, complicated or kind of even understand. So it's the same thing with your drivers. Some of them may be good with writing, some of them may be good with speaking, not writing. Like it will vary. So you have to go and figure out what the driver's needs are. And also who's going over the border and who isn't. Once you have that, there's a number of things that you can do. You can um, and I would recommend, like, helping them learn English, period, like using Duolingo or something like that. But they do need to know the trucking specific things. And so I would do some role play. So pretend you're an inspector and pull over the driver and interview them. Ask them for their documentation. Ask them where things are. Um, you know, find things in the binder or ask them where they're headed, ask them, where they plan to stop for the night. Things like have a conversation with the driver, see in English and see how they perform. And then you can show them some signs. Well, we've got the signs, like we've got a test with the signs in it, but you can also choose some of the signs that look more complicated and see how they do. But you can do that as an interaction, not as online. Online is great because you can give it to the driver and then it's not it's not really your issue. Like you don't have to do anything. You have to wait until they've finished it. But in this case, that's not really going to help you. What's going to help you is actually, talking to the driver and seeing how they do. And because that is what the enforcement official is going to do.
Yeah, so that's a
You
good
might as
point.
well get ahead of it.
Yeah, so even with the online test, I wouldn't assign it and have people do it on their own. Like have them do it in front of you because you don't want them looking things up or using some translator on their phone or asking a friend or any of that stuff. They kind of have to perform. This is like an oral exam, basically. So you get to stand there and talk, and you get to stand there
They're
and listen and then
saying,
speak back. So the test is great because it's standardized and you can sort of document your efforts and all of those kind of things. And you can then look at all of the analytics later to see where the trends are. Has everybody got a problem with road signs or everybody got a problem with something else and work with it accordingly. But you want to be doing that with people in an environment where they can do it sort of where they're forced to do it directly and not have any option for getting around it.
yeah.
So definitely look at it that way and use that to plan it out. So I think the scenario that you're talking about is great. We were talking the other day about this and about the value of doing kind of little group learning sessions or having like you have a Zoom or a Teams meeting. You don't have to get people physically together, but have them discussing it, get them talking more, practicing, using more internal language or internal communications in English. All of those kind of things will help. It is a practice kind of thing. It's like a muscle you've got to build up.
So, and the other real benefit to practicing, like doing a practice session and doing it, you could do those in Zoom, but you can do them in person as well, is that someone who's going across the border and getting pulled over and talking to an enforcement official who knows that there's an English language issue is going to be nervous.
Mhm.
Super nervous. These people are your drivers are going to be really concerned about doing this. And that's why people try and avoid it. So the more you practice the kinds of things that they're going to talk about and the kinds of language that they're going to use, the easier it's going to be when they actually do it. It's like rehearsing for a play. You do the rehearsal, 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 and then when you do the performance, it'll go fine.
That is an excellent point. And I'm glad you brought that up because I had totally forgotten about it. But this is something that came up when we were talking with one of our insurance partners who is sort of thinking about the issue and recognizing that that stress of the roadside inspection is already sort of putting people on edge. And even people that are pretty good in English, when they get that added anxiety of that roadside inspection, it makes it that much harder. So their ability to speak gets worse, their ability to comprehend gets worse. So, yes, the more you can practice it, the more you can get them comfortable with it so that they're not surprised by it, the more that they kind of know what to expect, the better they're going to perform. And every company, every decent sized fleet that's got a safety director in-house, that safety director was probably a driver and knows exactly what happens at a roadside inspection. They know exactly what's going to go on. So put on your inspector hat and start pretending and be as harsh as you can be as tough as you can be, or engage one of the many outside compliance consultants that are out there. We've got several partners that do this kind of work, and they can come in. Sometimes there's a lot of more value in an outsider coming in. There's a stranger that you don't know. Get them to come in and sort of do these random things, or you can do it as phone calls. Like you think how some people have done this, where we have somebody that is going to be randomly calling and is going to do a mock inspection with you, and it needs to all be in English. Have somebody just get a random list of these 5 drivers that they call every week and go through and do that. Like we see these kind of outreach things in the Best Fleets to Drive For program. They're very effective. It is a great way to start getting people thinking about it, practicing it, but getting them kind of building up those muscles and not so surprised. Like don't sort of put it off to the side and hope that it never happens. Expect that it's going to happen and prep for it.
Yeah, one of the things that is really good with practicing is that you can make all the mistakes.
Hmm.
So correct the mistakes. You can tell drivers, don't worry about it, just do your best and we'll see how it goes. We'll figure out what to work on. And so if they do fine with road signs, but they have a difficult time with the conversation, then focus on that. But it's not because the interaction is a physical person-to-person interaction, having an online training course as your as your solution is not going to work because that online training is not a person-to-person interaction. Like
Hmm.
it's just not. So it's not going to be as effective as you spending 20 minutes with a driver and saying, okay, let's go through this, or taking 3 drivers and saying, okay, one at a time, let's go
Hmm.
through this. And
Uh,
that will be a lot.
yeah. So we've got a bunch of questions here, and they kind of highlight one of the things that I want to talk about, which is how do you deal with the uncertainty of these things and how do you plan around it? Because there's still a lot of uncertainty. So what we've gone through is basically the entirety of the guidance. I'm looking at this document here. It's well, it looks like it's about 10 pages, but several of those pages are redacted examples that you can't see. And several pages are the whole history of this thing that Jane just went through. So the actual guidance really doesn't have a lot to it. So a lot of these questions, the answer is who knows? Nobody knows at this point. It hasn't been sorted out yet. It will get sorted out. So what do you do? How do you address these kind of things? Really, all you can do is step back and say, okay, what are they trying to accomplish? And then from there, what would make sense as an approach trying to accomplish that goal, accepting that there is going to be edge cases around it where people aren't going to do that, and then try and uh, plan around it as best you can. Some of you are going to be very risk tolerant and say, well, hopefully my drivers don't get caught, and just leave it at that. Those people probably aren't on this webinar because they're kind of ignoring the issue. Several of you are going to be very diligent and say, okay, well, here's my approach, and I'm going to figure out exactly what the issue is. And anybody that's got a problem, I'm going to make sure that they stay out of high risk areas. I'm going to work on helping them build up their English skills, and we're going to give them, I don't know, we're going to keep them on local runs where they're less likely to run into this kind of issue, whatever the plan is. But there's a whole range of different interventions and different things that might work depending on the fleet. And there's a whole lot of unknowns at this point that will become clear as this thing plays out over the next few months. So Samantha has posted a link. I don't think the link actually works, but that's the link that we've got in the handout that we're going to be sending out after this as well. This is the traffic control devices. So some of these other questions, how do you deal with officers' access in the US? Once a driver gets tested, does he have to get tested every time or does it get updated? If a driver's placed out of service, is that it? Is it the end of their career? How do you get around a driver who really didn't have that much of a problem and failed anyway? Jane, correct me if I'm wrong, but the guidance doesn't say anything about any of that, does it?
No. So I am looking at it like any other violation. This is the same as if a driver has, you know, an hours of service violation, or you've
Mhm.
got a flat tire or something like that.
Or
So,
as one of the other examples, a uh, fail a roadside drug test or fail a roadside,
right,
something like that that places them out of service.
right. They're not going to it isn't going to be carried over. It's not like drug and alcohol where it's on your record and you're stuck with it. All it is, can you speak English? Can you speak and understand English enough that you can get through the inspection? If so, great. And if you fail it once, I am 90% sure that they're not going to really look at it. They're going to basically see if you can do it the next time.
Yeah,
And
you could put that driver in a different vehicle, tomorrow after you go out and collect them and get your load sorted out. You could put that driver in another truck and take your chances again. But high
yeah,
risk that that driver's going to get, if that driver gets pulled over, they're probably going to fail it again and put it out of service again. So you could keep going back to it. I mean, it's like a truck that
a tire
you,
every single time.
yeah, you can keep going through. That's kind of your business. They don't. There is no indication in this documentation that it's going to be handled differently than other out of source or out of service violations. So approach it like that. That's why I think it's important to sort of step back and see, okay, what is the thing saying? Well, the thing is saying it's out of service. Does it say anything about how to treat this out of service? No. Okay. So how do we handle other out of service things? Oh, we do it like this. You kind of have to have that mindset to kind of figure these things out and recognize that there's going to be a lot of gray area for the first 3 months or so, until it gets kind of sorted out. Definitely, there will be
A
some
lot of room
regions that are, yeah, a lot of those
nuance.
things.
And it is going to happen. People are going to get caught in a net that they shouldn't be caught in. Like this happens with everything. When you're trying to put enforcement over a large area, they're going to make mistakes. So I don't know if the Canadian Trucking Alliance has really gotten anywhere. I know that they were trying to get some guidance, but I don't know if there's been any update on that. But you have to expect that people are going to get put out of service or get penalties. And I don't know exactly what the penalties are because I'm not totally sure that well, they probably have figured it out, but I haven't found anything yet. So I don't know how many points it's going to be. I don't know what the fine is. I don't know anything like that. All I know is that you are going to get placed out of service if you can't communicate in English. The accent issue, I don't know. I think it's going to depend on the enforcement.
Yeah. Yeah, you always have to assume that there's a good part of this, and I've seen this every time we talk to enforcement people, our enforcement partners, some of them are on this webinar. Attitude makes a huge difference. If you are helpful, if you are cooperative, if you have your act together, does your truck look like a disaster zone, or do you have everything in order, looking really nice? Are you making that officer's day easier or worse? That's going to make a big difference. So sure, yeah, there's going to be somebody that speaks perfectly with a heavy accent. I mean, that's what my first question is, what if you got somebody that's fresh from Scotland? Nobody can understand them. Or somebody that has got a heavy accent that is a native English speaker, and it isn't understood. So there's a lot of gray area to be handled, and a lot of these things, uh, a lot of these things have to be uh, worked out. Question about driver logs. Should a carrier be accepting logs that are not in English? Well, what happens if you have to show those to the enforcement roadside? I mean, if you can, if you want, I wouldn't. Drivers put out of service for failing English proficiency. Does English impact carrier profile? Same as other out of service. Can it trigger an audit?
As far as I'm concerned, it's out of service and it's treated as out of service. So in CSA, out of service, basically what it does, it just magnifies the points. the point system. So if there's, I don't know, the severity. So if it's like 6 severity points and you get placed out of service because of it, it just adds 2. So what will happen is if your drivers are getting put out of service because they have failed an English language proficiency requirement, just like anything, if you get 12 flat tires, you're going to get those points, and eventually it's going to, or if you get put out of service, you're going to get extra points. And then what happens is you get to a certain level, you get an intervention
Yeah.
from the FMCSA.
If all of your,
What
if
the violation is, you get that
Yeah,
intervention.
probably I would say English language proficiency is going to be a lower, could be lower on that list of things that push you into intervention territory. But I
It'll
haven't
be
seen,
driver fitness of
yeah, I
some.
haven't really seen anything thus far that details this in terms of CSA points. So that's still something to come out. That's something to be watching for. These are excellent questions, but this. Uh, Sometimes these things come out, these guidance documents come out, and they're not really fully fleshed out. They're not really fully thought
It'll
out.
guide you.
Like Jane's example from the hours of service rule change years ago. I mean, that was one that maybe the intentions were good, but the real world implication just was a mess. And I think we're going to see a lot of these things as well, because all of these are excellent questions. And I would say all of these questions, anything that isn't spelled out in the guidance, uh, absolutely ask CVSA directly or FMCSA. Pass it up to them because they need to start clarifying these things. Because there's what is it, 100,000 real fleets in the US that are dealing with this. And now some of them really don't have these kind of issues, but I would say there are probably tens of thousands of trucking companies that have all the same issues that you have. And if these things are not clarified in the guidance, who knows what's going to happen? And every enforcement officer is going to be able to interpret it on their own. And that just creates a mess as well. So the more of these things that you can think of, the more you ask them directly, the more it will get clarified.
The other thing is you can send messages directly to the CVSA, especially if you're a member, and they will respond. They want to make sure that everybody understands the regulations as well. So if any question that you have, I actually sent a message to CVSA, and the response, this was like a long time ago, and they didn't have any of the guidance, and they were basically said, well, we're waiting for the guidance. So now that they have the guidance, they're probably processing it and trying to figure out how to make sure that everybody's doing it the same way. So direct CVSA questions for sure.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely.
the drivers cited in French-speaking border zones with the consideration is, will they have the same considerations as the Mexican-US borders? Just so you know, they said nothing about the Canadian border. Those zones, those commercial zones, and I have a link to those zones too, they're all over the US. They're all at different states in the, oh, I wanted the second part of that
No,
question.
the second part of the question was the drivers understand French, but or understand English, but struggle to find the right words to
Practice, that's practice. Practice,
yeah.
practice. Get them to
Uh,
practice and
but
get them to learn the right words.
Yeah, so the guidance doesn't specify language. They don't care if you speak Spanish or French or Russian or Mandarin. It doesn't matter. English
And
or
the
not
only
English.
the only consideration is along the Mexican border.
Yes, where there's designated commercial zones where it's still an issue, but it's handled a bit differently.
So
So,
what I would say, just as a final thing, your drivers are going to be really nervous about this, and there's going to be a lot of rumors going around. There, this is the totality of the rule. You will get placed out of service if you can't speak English. Someone else will come and have to pick up the truck. I don't know how long the out of service is. I think it's just for someone to come and get the truck who does speak English. Um, so talk to your drivers about the rule, figure out a plan. if your drivers are not feeling, because like what whoever it's, I didn't see who did the question, but if your drivers are nervous, then tell them what the plan is.
It's
You know,
11 o'clock.
give them the opportunity to practice doing just that enforcement interaction and make sure that they have the words, because the more you practice, the more you'll remember the words. Maybe you do cue cards for them and so that they can learn the language, like the language that you need, and then give them, and then it is what it is. Like
Yeah.
there's not going to be much in the way of help, I think, for this.
Yeah. And we're going to have to wrap it up there. So put up the closing slide, and then we're done. And thanks everybody for attending. Like I said, you will get a handout with a wrap up, and we've got a recording of this. There was a question about whether you get copies of the recording. Yes, we'll have all of that for you. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us or call us at the numbers and email address there. And that's it for now. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.